that this election was an egregious assault on democracy. Vice President Pence, he said, was going to have come through for us. Trump then told this mob to walk down to the Capitol. The signal was unmistakable. These thugs should stage a coup so Donald Trump can hang on to power. The people's will be damned. This beacon of democracy became the site of a vicious attack. Rioters chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," as a noose and gallows were built a stone's throw from the Capitol steps. Capitol police officers were beaten and sprayed with pepper spray. Attackers hunted down lawmakers to hold them hostage or worse. Staff barricaded doors. People sent text messages to their families to tell them they loved them. They thought they were saying goodbye, Mr. Speaker. This was not a protest. This was an insurrection. This was a well-organized attack on our country that was incited by Donald Trump. Domestic terrorists broke into the United States Capitol that day, and it's a miracle more people didn't die. As my colleagues and I were being evacuated to safety, I never, ever will forget what I saw when I looked into the eyes of those attackers right in the Speaker's lobby there. I saw evil, Mr. Speaker. Our country came under attack, not from a foreign nation, but from within. These were not protesters. These were not patriots. These were traitors. These were domestic terrorists, Mr. Speaker. And they were acting under the orders of Donald Trump. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side have suggested that we just move on from this horror. But to gloss over it would be an abdication of our duty. Others on the Republican side have talked about unity. But we can't have unity without truth and without accountability. And I'm not about to be lectured by people who just voted to overturn the results of a free and fair election. America was attacked, and we must respond, even when the cause of this violence resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Each of us took an oath last week. It wasn't to a party, and it wasn't to a person. We vowed to defend the Constitution. The actions of Donald Trump have called each of us to fulfill that oath today. I pray that we rise to this responsibility, because every moment Donald Trump is in the White House, our nation, our freedom is in danger. He must be held to account for the attack on our Capitol that he organized and he incited. I solemnly urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying article. The damage this building sustained can be repaired, Mr. Speaker. But if we don't hold Donald Trump accountable, the damage done to our nation could be irreversible. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's interesting, the long-lasting sort of moral argument that he made there.
Ask for God's blessing and protection on you, for my friend, Mr. McGovern, for all who come to this chamber today to speak and to vote, for our wonderful staff that makes this possible, and most especially for the men and women of the Capitol Police and the other affiliated law enforcement agencies that are here to protect everybody and to make sure that this proceeding can go forward. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts, my very good friend, distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So he's going to end up not taking a whole 30 minutes to talk. They'll end up sharing that amongst the others. He might give a speech first, though.
Entire House of Representatives, and most certainly for the American people. For the second time in 13 months, we're meeting to discuss the impeachment of the President of the United States. Our meeting today does not arise in a vacuum and comes at what I hope and pray is the end of a tumultuous period for our country. Less than 1 week ago, Congress met to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. What started out as peaceful protest turned into a riot as an untold number of individuals stormed the Capitol building. 6 people died as a result of this mob. And it's only by the grace of God and the brave acts of the U.S. Capitol Police, the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police, the FBI, the ATF, and other responding agencies that there was not more bloodshed. Violent acts such as these have no place in our republic. These shocking and sobering events rest high on our minds today, as well they should. Certainly January 6, 2021 will live in my memory as the darkest day during my time of service as a member of this House. After these grave events, we as a nation and as an institution have an opportunity to come together. President Trump has conceded the 2020 election. Congress has certified the results of the election. And next Wednesday, President-elect
It's interesting. He just said Trump conceded. He never technically said the word concede, right? But he did imply that. It's interesting to hear a Republican, though, basically put that word on Trump.
Framework that has governed our republic since 1789 held firm. But instead of moving forward as a unifying force, the majority in the House is choosing to divide us further. With only a week to go in his term, the majority is asking us to consider a resolution impeaching President Trump. And they do so knowing full well that even if the House passes this resolution, the Senate will not be able to begin considering these charges until after President Trump's term ends. Mr. Speaker, I can think of no action the House can take that's more likely to further divide the American people than the action we are contemplating today. Emotions are clearly running high, and political divisions have never been more apparent in my lifetime. We desperately need to seek a path forward, healing for the American people. So it's unfortunate that a path to support healing is not the path the majority's chosen today. Instead, the House is moving forward erratically with a truncated process that does not comport with the modern practice and that will give members no time to contemplate the serious course of action before us. In every modern impeachment inquiry, an investigation and committee action has preceded bringing an impeachment resolution to the floor. In part, this is to ensure that members have the full facts, the opportunity to engage expert witnesses, and have a chance to be heard. It also provides due process to the President of the United States. And again, in every modern impeachment inquiry, the President has been given an opportunity to be heard in some form or another. This is necessary in order to ensure that the American people have confidence in the procedures the House is following. It's also necessary not because of the President's inappropriate and reckless words are deserving of defense, but because the presidency itself demands due process in the impeachment proceedings. Unfortunately, the majority has chosen to race to the floor with a new article of impeachment, foregoing any investigation, any committee process, or any chance for members to fully contemplate this course of action before proceeding. Professor Jonathan Turley is correct when he called this a, quote, dangerous snap impeachment, an impeachment that effectively would go to a vote without the deliberation or inquiries of the traditional hearing. Professor Turley also noted that, quote, the damage caused by the rioters this week was enormous. However, it will pale in comparison to the damage from a new precedent of a snap impeachment, unquote. If the majority is seeking consensus, this is hardly the way to create it. The majority is failing to provide the House with an opportunity to review all the facts, which are still coming to light, to discuss all the evidence, to listen to scholars, to examine the witnesses, and to consider precedents. This is not the type of robust process we have followed for every modern impeachment. And the failure to do so.
So it sounds like he's really complaining that there wasn't like an investigative commission that came before these articles of impeachment. And he's frustrated that this was sort of a, as he called, a snap impeachment, like a rushed impeachment.
Wars against the old one. Rather than seeking to heal America, they're seeking to divide us more deeply. And rather than following the appropriate processes the House has used in every modern impeachment, majorities rushing to the floor, tripping all over themselves in their rush to impeach the president a second time. What's worse, though the majority seems to believe that this course of action is self-evident, and that's simply not the case. I have to tell them it's not. Members that have reviewed the same conduct and have come to dramatically different conclusions. Legal scholars like Professor Turley and Professor Alan Dershowitz, both of whom condemned the president's statements, believe that his statements are not impeachable. I know other scholars have different points of view. Given this difference of opinion, shouldn't we have a better process than this? Shouldn't we have a chance to examine witnesses, discuss the matter with legal scholars, and consider this in committee? On a matter as grave and consequential as impeachment, shouldn't we follow the same process we have used in every modern impeachment rather than rushing to the floor. On behalf of generations of Americans to come, we need to think more clearly about the consequences of our actions today. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, there is no reason to rush forward like this, other than the very obvious fact that there are only 7 days left until a new president takes office. But what's worse, as Professor Dershowitz has pointed out, because of the Senate's rules, the case cannot come to trial in the Senate until 1 p.m. on January the 20th, 1 hour after President Trump leaves office. This is an ill-advised course, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker. Even Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, agrees. Senator Manchin is quoted this week as having said, quote, "I think this is so ill-advised for Joe Biden to be coming in, trying to heal the country, trying to be the president of all the people when we're going to be so divided and fighting again. Let the judicial system do its job," unquote. So what then is the point of the rush to impeach? We are coming off a horrific event that resulted in 6 deaths. We have an opportunity to move forward, but we cannot if the majority insists on bringing the country through the trauma of another impeachment. It will carry forward into the next president's term, ensuring that he will struggle to organize his administration. What's worse, it will continue to generate the bitterness so many of us have opposed. Why put us through that when we can't actually resolve this before the end of the president's term? Mr. Speaker, I think my colleagues in the majority need to think about this more soberly. We need to recognize we are following a flawed process. We need to recognize that people of goodwill can differ. We need to recognize that while the House may be done with this matter after today's vote, it will not be done for the country. It will not be done for the Senate, and it will not be done for the incoming Biden administration. The House's action today will only extend the division longer than necessary. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would note that there are other remedies that can be pursued. The president is expected to face litigation over his role in last Wednesday's events. There will be criminal proceedings against the perpetrators, and I hope all of those who stormed the Capitol will be brought to justice. And some members have proposed an alternative procedure, censuring the president, which could garner significant bipartisan support in the House. I do not think impeachment is a wise course, Mr. Speaker. I would urge my friends in the majority to reconsider. There's still time to choose a different path, one that leads to reconciliation and hope for a better and brighter days. With that, I urge opposition to the rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the powerful statement by Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who is the chair of the House Republican Caucus, entitled, "I will vote to impeach the president."
Without objection.
And I just want to be clear about one thing. If we vote to impeach the president today and we send it over to the Senate, there is nothing to prevent the Senate from taking it up immediately if Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell decides that he wants to proceed, number one. Number two, we all want to talk about unity. I can't think of anything that would unify this country more if there was a big bipartisan vote in favor of impeachment. Every second that this president remains in office is a danger to this country and to the world.
That's a good counter argument. You know, I've been listening to these arguments a lot, and a lot of the Republicans are saying, hey, we're so divided. This is just going to divide us more. I mean, this is an interesting argument to just say, well, we wouldn't be so divided if we just all agreed to impeach. It's not what you would expect to hear, but it's interesting.
Last week, I hid in an office for hours, terrified to open the door because I did not know if a rioter was on the other side ready to attack, kidnap, or murder me. But my experiences were just the tip of the iceberg. The U.S. Capitol was targeted, besieged, and ransacked on January 6th by a murderous mob holding a noose for Vice President Pence and targeting Speaker Pelosi. Their rampage resulted in destruction and 5 people dead. We were attacked by terrorists, but this time the terrorists were radicalized right here in the United States. Worse, they were radicalized by the president, who intentionally lied to his supporters that the election was stolen and then told them when to come to D.C., where to protest, and who to direct their anger at. The need to remove this president could not be more urgent. He is too dangerous to remain in office. Donald Trump must be held accountable. He must be impeached.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to immediately bring up a resolution establishing a bipartisan national commission on the domestic terrorist attack on the United States Capitol. This proposed bipartisan commission will be tasked with examining and reporting upon the terror attack on our Capitol that occurred last Wednesday. The commission will be bipartisan in nature, modeled after the 9/11 Commission, and will fully be empowered to undertake a full investigation and make recommendations to the President and to Congress. I can think of no more appropriate path for Congress to follow than by ensuring a bipartisan commission reviews all evidence and reports back to us on this horrific event. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record, along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. With that, I
Without
urge...
objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I urge a no vote on the previous question. I yield 4 minutes to my good friend, Mr. Davis of Illinois, the ranking Republican member on House Administration, for a further explanation of this amendment.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to thank the U.S. Capitol Police and the Sergeant-at-Arms employees who were here on the front lines protecting this Capitol last week during the unprecedented attack. It is imperative that we focus on ensuring a safe inauguration day, protecting members and staff during this time of increased threats, and making sure that our Capitol Police officers have the support that they need. We need to ensure that what we saw happen a week ago today never happens again. Yesterday, I introduced, along with Representatives Katko and Comer, a bill that would create a national commission on the domestic terrorist attack upon the United States Capitol. The bipartisan commission would consist of 10 members, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, appointed by the next president and by House and Senate leadership. This commission would be tasked with investigating the domestic terrorist attack that occurred in this building just a week ago. And it will provide us recommendations to prevent similar attacks from happening in the future. What we saw last week scared all of us who were here, but it also showed adversaries what it takes to take out a branch of government.
Not much.
When this commission is done with this investigation, it will submit a report to the President and to Congress detailing its findings and recommendations to ensure that no foreign or domestic adversary could accomplish what was done on January 6th. We need to ensure that we fully understand what took place last week and any and all issues that occurred during our response. Republicans and Democrats need to work together. We must unite to prevent any attacks like this from happening in the future, and we must protect this institution, not just for us, for the American people. That's why we should defeat the previous question so that we can establish this bipartisan commission to equip us with the information that we need to support our Capitol Police and the men and women who work in these buildings. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized
Hoyer.
for 1 minute.
I thank
All right, let's hear
the chairman of the Rules Committee for yielding. I congratulate him for his efforts and that of the Rules Committee in acting swiftly. I appreciate the remarks of Mr. Cole, for whom I have great respect, but I disagree with his sense of a lack of urgency in action. I do agree with him of the consequences of our action. There are consequences to actions, and the actions of the President of the United States demand urgent, clear action by the Congress of the United States. The chairman of the committee introduced the remarks and put them in the record. But I want to reference the remarks of the chair of the Republican Conference, which is the analog to the Democratic caucus. It is all the Republicans elected to the Congress of the United States in the House of Representatives. And they elected Liz Cheney, the daughter of the Vice President of the United States. The former whip of this House, Dick Cheney, with whom I served in the 80s. Representative Cheney from Wyoming, a conservative Republican, said this: "The President of the United States summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack." That is not some irresponsible new member of the Congress of the United States. This is the daughter of the former Republican whip and former Vice President of the United States of America. She knows of what she speaks. And she said this as well: "There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath of Constitution, to the Constitution." This is not, as Liz Cheney says, just some action. She characterizes it as the biggest betrayal of any president of the United States in our history. Mr. John Katko, not a backbench Republican who just got here and doesn't know what's going on. Mr. John Katko, who is the ranking Republican on the Homeland
Backbench
Security
Republican.
says this: "To allow the President of the United States to incite this attack without consequences is a direct threat to the future of democracy." This is not some backbencher on your side of the aisle, on their side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker. It reflects the sense of outrage, the sense of historic dissimilarity from the actions of any previous president. And then Mr. Adam Kinzinger, member to the NG Commerce Committee, a senior member from Illinois. So I have a member from Wyoming, a member from Illinois, and a member from New York. There will be others on this vote who will join them. And Mr. Kinzinger said this: if these actions, he hasn't had any hearings, he doesn't need any long drawn out consideration. If these actions are not worthy of impeachment, then what is an impeachable offense? There is no doubt in my mind that the President of the United States broke his oath and incited this insurrection. I tell my friend, Mr. Speaker, a gentleman for whom I have great respect, he is my friend, and I say that honestly, not just as rhetoric, as we say on this floor, because there's some that I don't consider friends, whose values I do not share. That is not Mr. Cole. We have a difference. Liz Cheney, John Katko, Adam Kinzinger, and other Republicans whom I have talked to within the last 24 hours believe this action is required. Now, let me say, I see the gentleman from Ohio is on the floor. He likes to say that we Democrats were elected and the first thing we wanted to do was impeach this president. And he's shaking his head in agreement because, like the President of the United States, he denies the facts. Trump-like. Fake news. December 6, 2017. Mr. Green, who I'm going to refer to, offered a motion because he saw the danger that confronted our country. And he filed a resolution of impeachment. And on December 6, 2017, we had a vote on that. And the majority of Democrats voted no. Actually, they voted yes to table, so that we did not proceed in 2017. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, thought, however, the next year that there was still a danger to our country. Some of us shared that view, but we were not confident that the case could be made or that the transactions that had proceeded would lead to conviction. So on January 19th of 2018, we had a motion to table Mr. Green's resolution. And the majority of Democrats voted to table that resolution. What a rush to judgment. And then on July 17th, 2019, 9 days before the call to Ukraine to get the Ukrainian leader to act on the political behalf of the President of the United States and withheld money to defend the Ukrainian people from Russian involvement and offered that as a bribe. And on July 17th, the majority of Democrats voted to table that resolution. So, Mr. Speaker, there was no rush to judgment. And then that call to which I just referred was on July 26th, 9 days later. I call that the aha moment. Yes, I knew what I thought, but that was proof. And the gentleman, some gentlemen have lamented that we didn't know the whistleblower, because after all, if we knew the whistleblower, we could intimidate everybody else from coming forward. And this president has done everything he can to intimidate whistleblowers, people who came forward and told the truth. And we had witness after witness after witness who confirmed what the whistleblower brought to our attention.
He's still mad about the last time around. It's almost sounding like, that's it, now we can get him. It's kind of what it sounds like.
Itself at some later time is to recognize the contributions that Al Green of Texas has made to getting us to this place. And I just want to, I'm not going to read all the resolution, but I want to read some excerpts from the resolution he has introduced. We won't be considering his resolution. We'll be considering Mr. Cicilline and over 200 others who have signed on to the resolution. Mr. Green had a resolution when introduced, resolved that Donald Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and the following articles of impeachment be exhibited in the Senate. Article 1 says, in his conduct with the President of the, in his conduct while President of the United States, unmindful of the high duties of his high office and dignity and proprieties thereof, and of the harmony and courtesies necessary for stability, to which my friend spoke, the gentleman from Oklahoma, John Trump, in violation of his constitutional and oath faithfully to execute the office of president, has harmed the society of the United States, brought shame and dishonor to the office of the President of the United States, sowing discord among the people of the United States by weaponizing hate for political gain. He went on to say on January 6, 2021, in a speech at the National Mall, President Donald Trump weaponized the hate and that resulted in violence, the deaths of multiple people, an assault on democracy, and an insurrection against the Capitol of the United States of America by inciting a mob. Who said that? Liz Cheney said it, and Al Green said it. Infected with white supremacists, carrying a rebel flag, erecting a gallows structure with a noose, wearing shirts and hateful messages, such as Camp Auschwitz. Work brings freedom. And MAGA, Civil War, January 6, 2021. MAGA, Civil War. They had the hats on of the army of MAGA, which I refer to as Make America Grieve Again.
What a redefinition of MAGA. Ouch.
We grieved on December 7th, 1941, and we grieved on 9/11. And yes, we grieved on January 6th of this year. He goes on to say what the president told this mob that Liz Cheney said was recruited by the president of the United States. And I quote, this is the president talking to this mob. All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by a bold and radical left Democrats, like the Secretary of State in Georgia and the governor of Georgia, which is what they are doing, and stolen by the fake news media, inciting, riling up, creating anger with the fake news and lies that the President of the United States said to these folks. That is what they have done and what they are doing, the President continued. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. And so what did they do? Incited by this president, as Liz Cheney said, as John Katko said, as Adam Kinzinger said, and frankly, what Secretary Chao acted upon, and what the Secretary of Homeland Security acted upon, and what so many others in the administration have acted upon. Disgusted, dismayed, and disheartened by what their president had done. They got out. They quit. The president further emboldened them, saying, this is the green resolution. We're not considering it, but it is the green resolution. The president further emboldened them, saying, you will never take back our country with weakness. We had a display of non-weakness, criminal, insurrection-like conduct. Recruited by and deployed by the President of the United States to come to this Capitol and stop the steal. The steal, of course, was we assembled accepting what all the courts that considered it said was a fair and accurate election of Joe.
I can't tell, but I think Steny a little upset. Jeez.
After his National Mall speech, a mob of his supporters proceeded to the Capitol complex. We know that. And so Mr. Green's resolution ends with, wherefore, to prevent national harm to our society, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, warrants immediate impeachment trial and removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States Constitution and the 14th Amendment. So in conclusion, Mr. Green is going to speak after me, but in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, let me tell my friend, Mr. Cole, I've been here some time. He has as well. I've served with Ronald Reagan, with George H.W. Bush, and George Bush. I had respect for all of those presidents. They cared about our country. They honored our Constitution. And they executed the duties of their office consistent with the Constitution and laws of our country. That is not true of this president. And therefore, he ought to be removed. And we have that opportunity to do so. Is there little time left? Yes. But it is never too late to do the right thing. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Speaker, at this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute.
That was impassioned. I like it when like, no matter what side they're on, I like it when they get, in it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had tears to well in my eyes as I heard Mr. Hoyer, and I know that hearts are hurting. It's a very sad time in the history of our country. No one is celebrating. No one wants to see this occur. I was at the Rules Committee by way of Zoom. I was there for the entire hearing. Those members on the other side, this is something that they understand and they take seriously. Regardless as to what's said, I could sense that they're hurting too. So I just want to thank everyone for all that has happened and the appreciation that's been shown. And I want to say that the healing that we talk about, that has to begin. May I have just 30 seconds?
I yield the gentleman 30 seconds.
Gentleman has additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. The healing, it has to start with some of these people who were there initially, who helped to lay this foundation, 110 people. And I want to recognize Maxine Waters, Congresswoman. A lot of them were threatened. Their lives were disrupted. And if I may, with unanimous consent, I'd just like to insert their names in the record.
Without objection.
I thank you, and may God bless our country as we go.
This guy's like the person you want as a guidance counselor. Like when you're having a bad day at school, this is the guy you want to talk to.
And distinguished Republican member, our leader of the Budget Committee, Mr. Smith of Missouri.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we defeat the previous question, we will amend the rule to immediately bring up the bill establishing a bipartisan national commission on the domestic terror attack of the United States Capitol. This has been a devastating week for our nation. Just last week, we stood right here in this very chamber while a violent mob laid siege to the seat of American democracy. It is vital we get the facts on what went wrong last week, why the security apparatus failed, and how we can ensure it never happens again. Less than 50 feet from where we stand in this room, a young lady lost her life through those doors. Through those doors. I was in this chamber when those gunshots rang. That is real stuff. That should never happen in the people's house. For the first time, can the House Democrats and the Speaker of the House put the people before politics? Please put the people before politics. At a time when our nation is more divided than ever before, let's put people before politics. President Trump will be leaving in 7 days. Let's try to heal this nation. Let's listen to the American people. This is the people's house. Let's operate for the people. This country is hurting. The people are hurting. Our colleagues are hurting. This is a reckless impeachment. This will only bring up the hate and fire more than ever before. Have a conscience. conscious. Put the people before politics.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Unify
Gentleman from
this
Oklahoma
country.
is recognized. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me remind all of my colleagues that what happened on Wednesday would not have happened if it weren't for the occupant in the White House. And if we want to put the people first, we all ought to vote to impeach him and remove him from office as soon as possible. With that, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today is a defining moment in our history. Congress was attacked by a mob directed by the President of the United States. It was a horrible, terrifying situation, but we all know deep in our hearts that it could have been much, much worse. We simply cannot let it stand. We cannot let it stand for the very soul of our democracy. We cannot let the President of the United States leave office without acting. We are the oldest constitutional republic in the world, and our Capitol is the sacred symbol of our great democracy. To my colleagues across the aisle, I appeal to your sense of service and duty to our nation and to the oath we all swore to uphold. Before we are Democrats and Republicans, we are Americans. Let us come together to fulfill our oath by voting for the resolution before us and by defending, preserving, and honoring our democracy. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to one of our new members, distinguished gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Mace, and note that this is her first speech on the House floor.
Gentlewoman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
First time
Thank you,
ever.
Mr. Speaker. And this is not the reason why I wanted to give my first speech in our chambers, in our hallowed halls. This is not what I wanted to do in my first week in office. But after the violent events of last week, watching and witnessing how heartbreaking this was, thank God I sent my kids home on Monday morning because I was worried about the rhetoric leading up to the events and to the rally on January 6th, the violence that could transpire. Not only were our lives in danger, but if my kids were here, their lives would have been in danger too, the two most precious people in my life.
Oh.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States, the U.S. House of Representatives has every right to impeach the President of the United States. But what we're doing today, rushing this impeachment in an hour or 2 hour long debate on the floor of this chamber, bypassing judiciary, poses great questions about the constitutionality of this process. I believe we need to hold the president accountable. I hold him accountable for the events that transpired, for the attack on our Capitol last Wednesday. I also believe that we need to hold accountable every single person, even members of Congress, if they contributed to the violence that transpired here. But today I'm asking my colleagues to remember the words of the legendary, the great leader in this country, Dr. Martin Luther King, who once said, "The time is always right to do what is right." And if we're serious about healing the divisions in this country, Republicans and Democrats need to acknowledge this is not the first day of violence we've seen. We've seen violence across our country for the last 9 months. And we need to recognize, number one, that our words have consequences, that there is violence on both sides of the aisle. We've contributed to it. We need to take responsibility for our words and our actions. We need to acknowledge there is a problem, take responsibility for it, and stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution. God bless every member in the chamber today, and God bless the United States of America. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh.
Gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, our government is founded on the principle all power flows from the people. Donald Trump challenged this principle in 2 ways: deceit and violence. The deceit is repeated and baseless assertion of an electoral fraud. The violence, the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6th. The mob was assembled by Donald Trump, incited by Donald Trump, and in service of Donald Trump's effort to overturn, through violence, what he lost at the voting booth. The violent mob breached the Capitol, killed and injured Capitol Police, destroyed property, threatened the Vice President, members of Congress, and staff, all to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. If we want unity, we must have accountability. So the question before this Congress, will Congress condone through acquiescence or condemn through impeachment Donald Trump's violent acts to overturn the election?
Gentleman's
Congress
time has
must
expired.
impeach.
Gentleman from Massachusetts
I yield
is
back.
reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished Republican leader of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan of Ohio.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, in his opening remarks, the Democrat chair of the Rules Committee said that Republicans last week voted to overturn the results of an election. Guess who the first objector was on January 6, 2017? First objector, the Democrat chair of the Rules Committee. And guess which state he objected to? Alabama. The very first state called, Alabama. President Trump, I think, won Alabama by like 80 points. Actually, he won it by 30 points. They can object to Alabama in 2017, but tell us we can't object to Pennsylvania in 2021? Pennsylvania, where the state Supreme Court just unilaterally extended the election to Friday? Pennsylvania, where the Secretary of State unilaterally changed the rules, went around the legislature in unconstitutional fashion? Pennsylvania, where county clerks in some counties, and you can imagine which counties they were,
Bringing up the election again. We're really going backwards here with Congress. I thought Trump gave this up already. This guy's still angry about it.
election. Guess who the second objector was in 2017? The individual managing the impeachment for the Democrats. Americans are tired of the double standard. They are so tired of it. Democrats object to more states in 2017 than Republicans did last week, but somehow we're wrong. Democrats can raise bail for rioters and looters this summer, but somehow when Republicans condemn all the violence this summer, the violence last week, somehow we're wrong. And Democrats can investigate the President of the United States, as Mr. Hoyer went through, try to impeach him, investigate him for 4 years, but will not look at an election that 80 million Americans, half the electorate, 80 million, Republicans and Democrats have their doubts about. I said this last night. I do not know where all this goes. And this is frightening for the country. We should defeat this rule, and we should defeat the impeachment resolution when it comes up.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, some of us objected 4 years ago as a protest vote to raise concerns about what all of our intelligence agencies had stated clearly, that Russia interfered in our election. But what the gentleman fails to acknowledge is that we all acknowledge that Donald Trump was the president the day after the election. Hillary Clinton conceded the day after the election. None of us push conspiracy theories like some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have been doing in this president, that somehow the president won in a landslide. Give me a break. Yesterday in the Rules Committee, I asked the gentleman from Ohio if he would just say 5 simple words. And if he was talking about healing. I said the 5 simple words that you could say that would help heal this nation are that the election was not stolen. That's it. 5 simple words. He refused. He said he never said the election was stolen. Well, the evidence shows otherwise. And let me quote from this Dana Milbank piece entitled, "5 pesky little words keep stumping Jim Jordan." And Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is this. This Capitol was stormed. People died because of the big lies that were being told by this president and by too many people on the other side of the aisle. Enough. People should be outraged as to what happened. It was unforgivable, unconscionable.
Unforgivable.
And coming up on this floor and talking about whataboutism and trying to make these false equivalencies, give me a break. The President of the United States instigated an attempted coup in this country. People died. Everybody should be outraged, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. If this is not an impeachable offense, I don't know what the hell is. This president is not fit to remain in office. With that, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio.
Gentleman,
He's pissed.
for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. This was not a one-off. It was a long time coming. It was a part of a plan to perpetuate Trump in office. Trump's campaign strategy was the election, the only way we can lose is if it's stolen. If it's stolen, it's fake, it's stolen, repeated by many of his fellow travelers on that side more than 150 times by Trump over the summer. Then they litigated to disqualify voters. That didn't work. Then they litigated to throw out ballots. Well, that didn't work. Then they attempted to delay the count and flip state legislatures. Well, that didn't work. Last ditch, the president called down to Georgia and said, "Can't you find me more votes?" And then one last desperate plea: stop the January 6th certification. And the president talked about that on September 26th. He said, "You know, if it goes to Congress, there's one vote per state, and we have an advantage." So I think this was part of a plan to disrupt the Electoral College of the United States. Giuliani, trial by combat. Trump, never take back our country with
Gentleman's
weakness.
time's expired.
You have to show
Gentleman
strength.
from
You have to be
Massachusetts
strong.
reserves.
If you
The
don't
gentleman
fight like
from
hell, you're not going to
Oklahoma
have a
is
country
recognized. The
anymore.
gentleman will
And then he
suspend.
said, "We love
The
you."
gentleman is no longer recognized. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen will suspend. The guy's still screaming. Oh, it's priceless.
Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthaler, new member of the Rules Committee.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm deeply troubled by last week's attack on our Capitol, and I pray for the families of Officer Sicknick and Officer Liebengood. As I have been saying all summer long, violence and rioting has no place in America, and the criminals responsible for last week's rioting must be brought to justice. At a time when our nation is still healing, we must seek out issues to work on that unite us, rather than issues that further divide us. I was greatly encouraged to see our country unite in condemnation of last week's lawlessness and the rioting. I am further encouraged that despite my Democrat colleagues' claims to the contrary, President Trump is committed to a peaceful and uninterrupted transfer of power. But that's not good enough for my colleagues across the aisle. With just 7 days left in President Trump's term, they are fast-tracking impeachment proceedings, a move which will no doubt further divide an already fractured nation. Even House Democrats' last impeachment effort, which was rushed through in record time, at the very least that had expert input, depositions, hearings, and deliberation. This latest attempt at impeachment ignores all precedent and ignores all due process. And it cannot be voted on in the Senate before Joe Biden is sworn into office. I'm also very concerned by the charge against the president of quote unquote incitement of insurrection. At his rally, President Trump urged attendees to quote unquote peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. There was no mention of violence, let alone calls to action. Look, I prosecuted terrorists in the Navy. I was a defense attorney in the Navy JAG Corps. I was a district judge. Just pull up the criminal statute. Look at the criminal code. President Trump's words would not even meet the definition of incitement under criminal statutes. The measure before us today sets a dangerous precedent whereby political parties can justify impeachment simply because they do not agree with the president. I would therefore urge my colleagues across the aisle to just take a step back, let cooler heads prevail, and consider how the actions we're taking here today will alter the course of history, will lower an already low bar of impeachment for all future presidencies. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, when my friends talk about the president being committed to a peaceful transition, I just point to what happened on Wednesday when his words launched a violent attack against this Capitol, where 5 people lost their lives and many more were injured. So give me a break. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
I thank you. Contrary to my good friend's words, the President of the United States is an insurrectionist. He led an insurrection against the United States of America. Prior to the January 6th attack by violent domestic terrorists, the President spoke to the crowd for 1 hour, and these were his words. These were his words, which is that we cannot take the nation back. We have to take the nation back with strength, and you must go and do that. Those were the paraphrase of his words. The president provoked these domestic terrorists with words, with actions, and conduct that portray and have contempt and hostility to the national value of equal justice under the law. Telling domestic terrorists, nearly all of them were white supremacists, many of them who support him politically, who stormed the Capitol to derail Congress from completing its constitutionally required duty of counting and verifying the votes.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my.
That guy's mic is set to such a stronger volume. The other people don't even have a chance.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this effort to move forward with impeachment hearings. What happened on Wednesday, January 6th, was nothing short of pure anarchy. And those individuals who broke the law should be held accountable for their actions. They should be prosecuted to the highest extent of the law, and they should be put in jail. This was one of the saddest days of my life last Wednesday, Mr. Chairman. Our thoughts and our prayers are with the police officers and other law enforcement who carried out their duties on that tragic day, including Officers Sicknick and Liebengood. Right now, our focus should be on healing our nation. With so many upset and dismayed at the actions of last week, it's our responsibility to chart a path forward to subdue the growing animosity and find ways to heal our country. Unfortunately, I don't believe this resolution will achieve those goals, especially 7 days ahead of the inauguration. This is very serious and concerning effort during such a tense and fragile time in our country. I urge my colleagues to consider how this will further entrench people during such a tense time. I cannot support this.
The gentleman will suspend. All members are reminded to wear face coverings while on the floor. All members and staff should be wearing face coverings while on the floor. Gentleman.
$500 fine.
From Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
For years, Donald Trump has honored thugs worldwide who suppress democracy. For months, with a daily diet of lies, he has made clear his refusal to accept any election in which he was not the winner. After failing completely in his repeated attempts to intimidate both Republican election officials into committing fraud and Republican appointed judges into ignoring our Constitution, he made a desperate attempt last week to block the final election count and prevent the peaceful transition of power essential to democracy. Trump basically attempted to overthrow the government, to violently overthrow the first branch of government, this Congress. Like his deadly reaction to the pandemic, he totally bungled the deadly attack. Both his frenzied, riotous mob and his congressional enablers were defeated. America, we did stop the steal. We stopped Donald Trump from stealing our democracy and imposing himself as a tyrant.
Wow, total flip of stop the steal. Oh.
Gross misconduct. But more importantly, we declare to the next Trump-like aspiring tyrant, not in America. We love our democracy too much. Our capital is scarred, but our democracy survives. Violating his sworn duty to protect and defend our Constitution by seeking to violently overthrow the government.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts
If this is not
reserves.
impeachable,
The gentleman
nothing
from
is.
Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I advise the chair I have additional speakers on the way, but they're having a difficult time, so I will reserve my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Just 1 second. On November 3rd, the American people voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to serve as President and Vice President of the United States. The country was about to enter a new era with great hope for change. And yet, with a decisive mandate and majority, the president used untruthful claims to end the completion of a constitutional process of collecting the electoral votes, making Joe Biden President of the United States.
Not accepting the will of the American people, the president unleashed the most horrific violence that overwhelmed the security forces at this Capitol, which was overrun for the first time since 1812, putting the lives of so many at risk. Indeed, a day of infamy. This impeachment will be viewed as a transcendent vote where all will be judged. Vote to impeach the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is
I
recognized.
continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. From Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to urge the impeachment of Donald Trump because the attack on the Capitol and the Congress was the single most depraved betrayal of the U.S. Constitution ever committed by a president. The traitorous incitement of an insurrection demands not just impeachment, but removal of from office immediately. Violence during the transfer of power, Confederate flags, anti-Semitic paraphernalia desecrated this Capitol. So accountability must come swiftly. We must act with the same resoluteness we showed in the early morning hours after the insurrection, where we ensured the will of the voters was effectuated. Donald Trump's defilement of this Capitol will not stand. It demands impeachment now. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Excuse me, 2 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
For 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. These articles charge incitement. Once before, the House impeached the President of the United States within a week of the alleged offense. That was President Andrew Johnson, days after he removed Secretary of War Edwin Stanton in 1868. Over 50 years later, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the Tenure of Office Act that President Johnson had refused to obey. In other words, the House was not only hasty, it was wrong, punishing noncompliance with an unconstitutional law. At least when that occurred, the constitutionality of the law in question was unsettled. Here, however, an angry House majority races to impeachment in direct violation of settled constitutional law. Again, the articles before the House charge incitement to insurrection. They do not specify inciting language. The law is well settled. Quote, what is required to forfeit constitutional protection is incitement speech that specifically advocates for listeners to take unlawful action. The violence last Wednesday was abhorrent. Perpetrators should be prosecuted. Those responsible for security decisions held accountable. Congress can disapprove, revile, condemn, even censure, but you cannot, consistent with the rule of law, punish that which the Constitution's First Amendment declares protected. If you do it, the violators of duty to this Constitution, however angry, will be those who vote for this article of impeachment. It is not Mr. Green's article of impeachment. It is incitement. And the Constitution is settled on that point. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, let us not mince words about what happened last week. It was a violent attempt to interrupt our democratic process. It was a targeted blow at the most essential process that makes us a democracy. It was a direct and specifically incited by the President of the United States. For years, we have been asked to turn a blind eye to the criminality, corruption, and blatant disregard to the rule of law by the tyrant president we have in the White House. We as a nation can no longer look away. The president not only incited an insurrection against our government, but has in word and deed led a rebellion. We cannot simply move past this or turn the page. For us to be able to survive as a functioning democracy, there has to be accountability. We must impeach and remove this president from the office immediately so that he cannot be a threat to our democracy. I stand ready to fulfill my oath of office. And I challenge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to do the same. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a New York Times article published January 9th entitled, "Our President Wants Us Here, the Mob That Stormed the Capitol." It's another example of why our country cannot risk even one more day of Donald Trump.
Without objection.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1
Thank
minute.
the gentleman for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, last week, Congress was under siege by a mob motivated and directed by the President of the United States. Our Vice President was the target of that mob. Members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, were targets of this mob. And I witnessed, for the first time in my life, Americans fighting Americans, all at the behest of our own President of the United States. And as Americans, we can do better. And I will vote for impeachment today for our nation, for our children, and for our grandchildren. And I'll be voting for impeachment so that America will once again be the shining city upon the hill, whose beacon light guides freedom-loving people everywhere. I urge my colleagues to join me and vote for impeachment. With that, I yield.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
May I ask the gentleman how many more speakers he may have?
Whenever the gentleman is
In
prepared.
the meantime, take a look. This is the that New York Times article they were talking about. Our president wants us here, the mob that stormed the Capitol. And really, they're using a quote, multiple quotes from here from people who were caught on live streams saying things like, "It's time for war. We're not backing down anymore. This is our country." And then, of course, one of the quotes was, "Our president wants us here." Somewhere in the article here. But anyway, I'll find the exact spot where it is. We'll keep listening though.
I want to thank my good friend, the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, and I want to thank everybody that came to the floor, had something to say at an important moment. And I think the debate, while spirited, reflected the civility and decency of the institution that we're all privileged to be part of. And I'm very proud to have been part of it, very proud of all the members and the manner in which they participated. I want to again thank the staff and thank those who kept us safe in the process, particularly the Capitol Police. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I oppose this rule and I oppose the majority's actions today. After the traumatic events of last week, the majority should be taking steps to unite us. Instead, they are only dividing us further. They're rushing to judgment, in my opinion, and bringing up impeachment after failing to follow any meaningful process whatsoever.
Got it. So here it is. Our president wants us here. A man could be heard saying during the live stream video that showed him standing within the Capitol building, "We wait and take orders from the president." It's interesting. They got a lot of good, really empowering photos in here as well. Anyway, that article, if you wanted to see it, they brought it up in Congress. That's why I'm mentioning this. They're putting this in the record, but it's this right here. Our president wants us here. The mob that stormed the Capitol. All right, we'll keep going.
Not apart. Let us celebrate the peaceful transition of power to a new president rather than impeaching an old president. And let us affirm and reaffirm with one united voice that the House does not rush to judgment on the most consequential action we can take. We deserve better than that, Mr. Speaker, and the American people deserve better than that. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues, as they reflect on this minute and we move into our next stage of debate, to remember that we're all privileged to represent a great and a good people. who've gone through a horrifying and tragic time, and that we owe them the opportunity to reflect, and we owe them our best efforts to bring together. I know people on this floor feel very passionately about this subject with different points of view. I honor each one of those points of view, and I honor the people that voice them. Let's remember when we're through this, that we're one people, and that we have one purpose, that we're free through the grace of God and millions of brave Americans over centuries of time, and we will remain that way, and we will move forward together once we settle this debate. With that, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question, no on the rule, no on the underlying measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank my friend, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Cole, for his friendship. Great respect for this institution. Mr. Speaker, it is impossible for me to fully capture the reverence that I have for the United States Capitol. You know, I worked on these grounds starting back when I was a college intern, working for Senator George McGovern back in 1977. No relation. Great last name. But since that time, I have done everything from working as a staffer for Congressman Joe Moakley of Massachusetts to being elected to the United States House of Representatives myself. But that internship will always be a high point of my life. Coming here for the first time, walking these hallowed halls, and seeing the glory of American democracy up close. The idea that someone would incite an out-of-control mob of homegrown fascists and domestic terrorists to desecrate the people's house fills me with a deep sadness for our country. The contempt that these people had for our democracy and our freedom fills me with horror. And what Donald Trump did, encouraging them, fills me with rage. Rage, not just on behalf of all of those serving here, but all of those who work in these halls. And I'm talking about the reporters, the cafeteria workers, the custodians, the clerks, the parliamentarians. I go on and on and on. And the staff, the Democratic staff, the Republican staff, the nonpartisan support staff, who were terrorized, some hiding under their desks and barricading in their offices. I was in the Speaker's chair the day this unfolded, and many of the people who are sitting up there now were present at that time. What a horrifying thing for anybody to have to experience. Now, some of my Republican friends have been trying to lecture us about unity here today. Unity, after they voted to overturn a free and fair election in the United States of America, but also preaching unity and not acknowledging that for 4 years, many of them gave oxygen to Donald Trump's conspiracy theories, to the big lies. They turned the other way in the face of racism and bigotry and how he embraced some of the most intolerant voices in this country. They just let it go. You know, I will remind everybody here that words have consequences. And ignoring words that are wrong also have consequences. You know, what happened would never have happened if everybody stood up in unity and called out the president when he was not telling the American people the truth, when he was pushing a big lie. We will never have unity without truth and also without accountability. This week in Congress, we saw the best of us and the worst of us. Some of my colleagues have shown that they will defend this president no matter what he does. There's nothing that he could do that would dissuade them from all-out support. But some are standing up and doing the right thing under tremendous pressure, and I am proud of that, and I honor them for their courage. This impeachment resolution outlines the truth of what Trump did. It is time that this Congress now holds him accountable for his words and for their devastating impact. Last week, we took an oath to protect this nation. As history calls on us today, I pray that we all have the moral clarity to uphold it here today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on order in the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I would request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
Oh. All right. Well, now that was an interesting hour of debate we got there. We got some good good back and forth. I don't think as passionate as what we saw last time. A little less excitement from last night. So maybe there's still a little bit of sleep because it's so
Less
early.
than 13 months since the U.S. House of Representatives found President Trump guilty of 2 articles of impeachment. He is now facing one charge, 1 article of impeachment, incitement of insurrection for his actions before, during, and after last week's deadly domestic terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol that left 5 people dead. Here's what's ahead today in the U.S. House. The first vote here, this is a procedural vote as Republicans seek to amend the rule for debate, adding a bipartisan national commission on the domestic terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol. They are voting by proxy, as they did last night, and that may take some time. The first vote, for example, last night took nearly 1 hour. Following this vote, they will move on to vote on the rule, which would provide for 2 hours of debate on the impeachment resolution. We expect a final vote on impeachment sometime between the 3 and 4 o'clock hour Eastern this afternoon. You're watching live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
That's a good overview. So basically, now they're going to spend honestly, yesterday, I feel like it was longer than an hour. Now they're debating on whether or not we should have a commission to look into the violence that occurred last Wednesday. Then we'll also see more debate over probably the next 4 hours. We're going to have a good amount of debate. But for the next hour or so, we pretty much got nothing to see. So we'll come back. We'll circle back probably closer to maybe the end of debate or maybe even the end of the vote the next time. We got a pretty good idea of the arguments this morning here on the impeachment vote. So now it's just a matter of waiting another 4 or 5 hours. Obviously, the expectation is that Trump will probably be impeached. That is the expectation we're thinking. What happens in the Senate? That'll be a whole different story. That'll be quite interesting to see. So for the meantime, thank you so very much for being here, folks. We will see you in the next stream. We'll see what happens with this commission vote, but we won't watch them vote because it's all being done by proxy again. So folks, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for enjoying the stream so far with me, and we'll be back later. Thanks. Bye.